Warning, this game contains content that might not be suitable for most audiences. Viewers' discretion is advised. All humans must die. I just never thought my own village would kill me. The blunt end of a spear stabbed into my upper shoulder. My balance faltered under the weight of my growing fever, and I fell to my knees with a harsh thud. The snow and ice seeped through my outer layers. The bitter chill of winter bit at me, but it paled in comparison to my fever. The unexpected fall sent a bolt of pain through the source of all my woes. The incomplete circle felt like a brand under my skin. The bruised veins spreading from it ached with each beat of my frantic heart. The mark burned runes onto my skin from the inside. These marks would spread across my body as a painful countdown of my condition. It was a curse mark, a sign of evil influence or divine retribution on the host's body. Most brought it upon themselves by dealing with demons. Others were merely unlucky recipients of cursed items or the wrath of a ghost. Some received them as punishments from the gods. I knew I hadn't angered the gods or spoken with devils. That wasn't in my nature, and I thought the others would agree with that. The grim faces that stared back at me proved how wrong the idea was. The people who I had stood beside for my entire life looked upon me with pity and fear. Not fear for me, fear for them. I was no longer the friendly village baker. I wasn't their lifelong neighbor, friend, or family. I was a threat. The black vein spreading from the mark indicated it was a cursed plague mark. When the central mark was completed, a disease that no natural medicine would cure would spread from me like wildfire. Only holy power could rescue the patient. Only holy power could protect others from the disease. Frostine had no such holy power. Our only priest was a man abandoned by the divine. That fact had been proven by his inability to construct even simple blessings for newborns. In the past, he was a war hero who used his divine authority to strike down the foes of the Empire. That past guaranteed him protection from the crown, which meant we had to accept him when he decided to move in. We had to follow his orders. We had to listen to the shrill rants he called sermons, like the ones he was screaming at the top of his lungs to convince everyone else to leave me to die. He looked nothing like the golden sages one would find on the walls of the Davine church. They were perfect, almost inhuman beings. His robes fit incorrectly on his tiny frame. His lack of hair made it difficult for his tall hat to find purchase. His hands flailed about under two long sleeves, and his bloodshot eyes were wide and manic. "Look at how it grovels on the ground to gain your sympathy," he practically spat at me. "It wears the face of your dear Lionel, but I assure you that thing is no longer him. The minute the mark began to sprout, all who Lionel was, all of who he could be, was destroyed. It has seized his mind and body alike." "That's madness." I winced. My cough-worn throat made it impossible for me to match his volume. Luckily for me, there was one person who could overpower him. "Just admit it. You're an abandoned hack who can't do his job." Edith's powerful voice pierced through his monologue. In all of her knit layers, she looked like an old puffed-up cat while she waved her cane in the air. "Ho have been one of us since he was a baby. He's part of this community." She glared at the older folk in the crowd. None of them could meet her gaze. A few even shuffled their feet like naughty children. "We promised his parents that we will look after him. But what are you doing? Listening to the opinion of the village idiot." Despite the gravity of the situation, I felt my lip quirk up at that. Priest O'Clarion gaped at her audacity. He was usually a light shade of pink from exertion, but that pink darkened into an enraged red. Many of the villagers took a step back to avoid his oncoming wrath. Edith, on the other hand, kept trying to move forward. Her grandson's stubborn grip on her prevented her from reaching me. If she were just 10 or 20 years younger, she'd be by my side. "Like the words of a gambling whore mean anything under the eyes of the gods." "Oh, shut up, you stupid priest." People balked at that. Yes, Edith had spent her youth working in a whorehouse to the south, but she'd practically raised most of this village. A few people even looked angry about it. Not much they could do with the hunters aiming bows at them. Even half-hearted glares were met with silent warning looks from the hunters. They didn't even have to kill anyone, but if O'Clarion ordered it, it would be done. "That is way too much power for this freaking idiot." O'Clearden didn't need divine authority when he had the backing of the crown. No one would risk bringing the Emperor's wrath down upon Frostine. Like you know anything, outsider? Don't take it out on him that you don't have the ears of the gods anymore. I am not abandoned by the gods. If you weren't, you'd be able to handle this. Silence! His bellowing was even more pathetic than usual. He even stamped his foot like a child. Boy, take your grandmother and lock her in your home. There will be an exorcism tonight after we burn the demon's belongings. Shocked gasp echoed through the village. Some people shared looks of disbelief. For a moment, I wondered if someone would intervene. Exorcisms were hard on young people. For the elderly like Edith, they would very well be fatal. At once, hunters! If he does not listen, strike them both down. If anyone has a problem with that, they can get an arrow as well. The hunters almost looked sick for a moment. They hid their disgust quickly and focused on the task at hand. Stop. Don't. I tried to argue. This time I managed through enough volume to catch some attention. One of the hunters stabbed the blunt end of her spear into my side to silence me. She gave me a desperate look to be quiet. Don't you dare, boy. If I'm to die today, I'll die with my honor. No. Damn you! Edith's grandson dragged her away with the help of the hunters. She argued with each step, but she was too old to fight back. She was the 9th exorcism O'Clearden had ordered. Jesus Christ, can we put him on a burning stake? 8 other villagers, my only allies it seemed, had also been detained while arguing with him. Edith had just been one of the last to hear about this. I imagine her family tried their best to keep her from learning about it all for obvious reasons. My last defender was dragged away. Without Edith, I had no one who could or would speak for me. It is good that we caught this monster early. Look at how many minds it has polluted with its filth. It preys upon your notions of family and brotherhood, my dear faithful flock. Do not fall for it. It will use your sensitive hearts to spread its plague across the world. Are you really gonna listen to the dude who literally called you sheep? Jesus! It is in its nature to spread and destroy everything. The priest sneered down at me. The glint of gleeful victory in his eye made me shudder. But now it will die alone in the snow, away from healthy bodies it could taint. Once Heimos' wrath passes, we will send word to the marvelous Duke of Karkut. As though the living god heard his name, the snow began to fall even faster. Heimos would not descend his mountain and save me though. He was a prisoner of the true gods on Mount Gelus, certainly no savior of an Andadalan peasant. A team of golden sages will ensure the world is saved by purifying the corpse. For now, all we must do is not harbor its disgusting husk in our midst. I looked ahead and up at Mount Gelus, the domain and prison of Heimos. It was a stark, white mountain, lined with bare pine trees. A ring of black clouds rested near the peak like a crown, and they surged with unnatural bright blue light. In a day or so, that ring would fall down the mountains like blizzards that would touch all of the Andatal Duchy for about 2 weeks. It would freeze every last road, city and town. No business would come and go. No one would dare to leave the arcane sigils that protected their homes. Anything caught outside arcane protection would be lost under dozens of feet of snow. It was the perfect time to bury a plague-ridden body. No one would find me for months. Please, everyone. I knew I looked pathetic, unable to stand on my own in the snow. I hoped it might spark sympathy in someone. Anyone. All the faces looking back at me were met with sad determination. A few people flinched when I was struck again, but no one called out in my defense. A plague would devastate Frostine. It could kill the nearby villages too. It was pure logic. The one must be sacrificed for the many. The harsh region of Andatal did not allow for bleeding hearts. Any that existed would freeze over eventually due to necessity. As I looked at the people who I called my family, I felt angry, sad, forgiving. I feel sad. I felt hot tears well up in my eyes. My shaky hands attempt to brush them away, but trails of hot water cut through the frost on my cheeks. No one could look at me. Even the hunters pointedly look around me rather than at me, tracking me with that peripheral vision. The small, broken sob I couldn't contain made them all flinch. Their determination wavered just a little, but not enough. Priest O'Clearden merely scoffed. Look at it now, mewling like a babe to play on your weak heart. Heed it not. He scowled at their refusal to look up. Raise your heads. You are not killing anyone. On the contrary, you are saving the world. Shut your damn trap. Not a single head rose. I heard a few murmur of prayer from my soul, but that was the only mercy granted to me. While old Cleridan ranted on, I struggled to collect myself. Hunters, drive him out. Do not let Lionel enter the village. If he tries, kill him on sight. No questions, no second chances. Keep a tight perimeter. 2 of you! Come with me to burn his belongings. We cannot risk that one of his belongings is also cursed. All of it must burn! No one moved at first. Old Cleridan stamped his foot and bellowed, At once! The crowd reluctantly began to disperse. A few people shot me lingering looks. I could see conflicting emotions flicker across their faces. In the end, no one dared to step towards me. Within a few heartbeats, only 2 hunters remained to escort me past the arcane barrier for the village. It took all of my strength to haul myself out of the snow. It took all of my focus to not immediately fall back down again. My stiff hands awkwardly shook the snow from my coat and pants. I was still freezing cold, but it did feel better. The hunters watched each motion carefully. They seemed particularly tense when my hands dropped near my pockets. They calmed once they realized I was trying to keep my hands warm. They gave me a few seconds to get my balance. Then they gestured for me to move forward with tired, sad eyes. The walk was silent beyond our footsteps. I didn't even try to beg. They wouldn't do anything that could get them in trouble. At the edge of the barrier, they stopped. We continued on, leaving the protection of the only home I'd ever known. Looks like I'm joining my parents sooner than they would have liked. Once I had reached the edge of the Ansa forest, I paused to think about my options. I had gone to visit Old Man Miller early in the morning, expecting to be sent home with some medicine like usual. I didn't leave home ready for a long journey. No food, no water, no spare clothes, nothing. I had nothing to survive the journey through the region, let alone through Heimos' wrath. Not that there was much of a journey to make. The nearest village was Riverfallow. Riverfallow was just as tiny as Frostine, but did have a functional priestess. I also had a family there, blood family. They might be willing to help me. The problem was time. By arcane caravan, it would take half a day to round the jagged tip of Mount Gelus that separated Frostine and Riverfallow. By healthy foot, it was a 3-day journey. In my condition, I doubt that I would even make it partway through the journey before I collapsed. The long path was certain death, but there was a shortcut. If one cuts through the domain of Mount Gelus, they would find a walking path once made by the Mortarwall barbarians to avoid the long trek around the mountain. It had once been the busiest road in the region. Now that Mount Gelus was turned into a prison for an immortal being not fond of humans, it saw very little traffic. Deep within the new prison would be an abandoned temple to one of the gods. The living gods usually lived in these temples. Apparently, they called these temples Sacrariums amongst themselves. At least, that was how they called their homes in the fables of old. The Sacrarium was the seat of their power, but not the limit. Heimos supposedly controlled every inch of the mountain from the highest tip to a mile around the bottom. His far reach made every inch of Mount Gelus dangerous. To outsiders, he was just a living god of medicine. To the locals, he was a living god of winter too. We had our fables and our legends. He was known to be cranky and unpleasant. His mood swings caused our bad weathers after all. He'd also been blamed for more than a few thousand deaths. Despite that, Heimos wasn't the only problem. No, the main problem was the twisted creatures that dwelled on the mountain. All matters of devils skulked in the shadows of dead trees, and they gleefully preyed on any human they came across. Their antics ranged from simply human eating to torturous mind games that could last days. A sick, slow-moving target like myself would be irresistible. But if I didn't get caught, I could make it to Riverfallow in a day. It really wasn't much of a decision, not if I actually wanted to survive. With Heimos' wrath almost ready to roll down the mountain, no one on horseback or in a caravan would pass me on the road. I couldn't rely on luck to rescue me. I needed to take the path I had the most control over. Did I want to survive? The question repeated over and over in my mind. For a moment, despair tempted me with no. Then I pushed through the pain and realized I wanted to live. I straightened my back and looked towards the mountain that haunted the dreams of all Andadalin children. It was my only option. I took a step forward and paused to maintain my balance. Then I took another, and another, and another. The slow process had me grinding my teeth. My body could barely remain upright. My head pounded with agony, and my muscles screamed in exhaustion despite the journey having just started. I refused to die. I refuse. Determined and unyielding, I began my journey through the most dangerous area in all of the Empire. I desperately tried to remember all the fables surrounding Mount Gelus and its prisoner. Heimos, as far as we knew, predated the Empire by at least 50 years, so he had around 872 years of stories surrounding him. The mortal man who broke the law of mortality and defied death itself, now was a solitary figure on a cursed mountain. Mount Gelus was a dark, dangerous place from the beginning, but its new king made it even worse. Harsh blizzards occurred every winter. Even in the spring, the temperature barely rose. His characterization varied depending on the speaker. The church told stories of brave heroes forced to defeat him with wit to save loved ones. The church also had many fables about Heimos tricking people into leaving the faith and sending them to hells. The locals quietly whispered old stories of desperate people pleading their case before an icy god. If he deemed their cause worthy, he would grant them mercy. In our fables, Heimos was a raven attacking an abusive husband, a strong wind guiding lost children home. Nobody knew which was really true. I had neither magic nor weapons to defend myself. Frankly, I doubted my ability to plead my case due to the splintering pain in my head. All the stories had one common beginning, a greeting. Heroes and desperate alike were expected to introduce themselves upon entering his domain. The desperate often brought gifts of gold and fine fabrics to sweeten the deal. I had no such offerings to give. Will he be insulted? I have nothing to show. Fear and uncertainty tied around my heart, strangling my dim bravery. Doesn't matter. I still have to try. As I continued forward, the natural sounds of the forest began to fade. Rabbits no longer darted from burrow to burrow. No squirrels scurried up trees with their cheeks full of food they needed to survive. The deer known to trot about were nowhere to be seen. Most concerningly, the air began to slow. Winds began to grind to a halt with each step towards danger. The snow began to fall in an eerily perfect pattern. I knew the exact moment my foot crossed the boundary between my world and his. Icy dread and choking fear raised up my leg from my foot. My entire body shook under its weight. I took a step back and struggled to correct my panic breathing. I can't. I turned to look back towards Frostine. Despite the distance, I could see a pillar of black smoke rising into the gray sky. They really were burning my things. I wrapped my arms around myself and bit back a sob. The sight reminded me rather quickly that I couldn't just go back. As long as I was cursed, I had no home to return to. I turned back towards the path I had to take and swallowed. You can do this. You can do this. The chant did little to make me feel braver. All the same, I forced myself to cross the barrier. I felt like I'd stepped into a void. Absolutely no sound beyond my ragged breathing and shuffling could be heard. The wild breezy snow began to fall at a gentler pace. No wind stirred the snow on the ground or bent tree branches. Not a single animal could be seen or heard. That icy feeling of dread and fear continued to crawl through me. The alien sensation felt like a parasite hunting for somewhere to go. I stood shivering and scared for a while, forcing myself to grow used to the feeling. It took time for me to find my voice again. No matter what, I had to greet the living God. I didn't want to find out what he did to unannounced guests. My hands patted through my pockets to try and find something, anything I could offer up. I had a small pocket knife, a wooden bracelet from my parents, and a handful of coins. I doubted he'd want some peasant's dingy knife, but maybe I could offer him some blood. If he was violent and foul like the church said, he might be satisfied with a blood offering due to the pain it would cause. I didn't want to give up the bracelet. It was all I had left of my parents. The coins were probably the most neutral offering. They weren't gold, but silver might do. I stared at the possible offerings in my hands and made my decision. I offer my bracelet? Heimos might take offense to the blood, seeing it as a challenge. The coins might insult him by not being gold. The most I had to offer was the sentimentality attached to my bracelet. Reluctantly, I knelt down and gently placed the wooden beads into the snow. I couldn't bring myself to stand up and away from the bracelet yet. Thus I bowed my head and spoke aloud while on my knees. Heimos. My shoulders tightened at the sudden weight of unseen eyes slamming onto them. Even though I was alone in the snow, another being was with me in some capacity. I felt their presence move around me, observing me. I am but a sickly traveler, seeking to use more to pass. I promise not to cause trouble for you. I apologize that this is all I have to offer. I gestured to the beaded bracelet. This is the last memory of my parents that I have. Not having the beads resting against my heart made my chest feel empty. I offer it to you and beg you, please, let me pass. The presence tightened around my frame. I watched as small roots rose from the snow, exploring the bracelet. A breath I didn't know I was holding fell out of me when the roots wrapped around it and pulled it down. The sound of beating wings shattered the silence of the area. Dozens of ravens began to swarm my surroundings, some white, some black. It was a surprising display of life in this desolate place. They settled only on a handful of gray trees that filled the area. No crow touched any of the black trees. This made me realize that these trees did not exist outside Mount Gelus. The gray ones were comparable to pine trees, but the black ones looked like twisted dead things. I knew some stories spoke of a flock of ravens that dwelled in Mount Gelus, but I'd never seen them before. These ravens watched me with an eerie amount of intelligence. They looked back and forth at one another, almost like they were talking. I stayed completely silent. Can't. I flinched at the raspy croak. Dangerous. Another raven spoke. Each raven only spoke one word, and only spoke a second when everyone else in the flock had spoken. Heimos says, leave. I can't. The ravens fell quiet once more. Then they continued. Why? I'm sick. Can? Yeah, right. Of course, a living god would find it weird a sickly person would travel his domain. It didn't make much sense. I should be at home resting after all. I have a cursed plague mark. My village abandoned me as a result. I felt my eyes well up again, but I rubbed the tears away. They wouldn't even let me die at home. The ravens continued to watch me in silence. I added another hasty apology. I'm sorry that I'm intruding. I really have no choice. The ravens listened to me silently before looking back and forth at one another. It was really unnerving to not know what they were thinking. Very. Well, I almost sighed in relief at that. The ravens took flight once more, leaving me behind. I noticed two lingered for a bit, but I was alone again soon enough. Completely alone, the unseen observer only withdrew. That didn't go terribly. As far as I could tell, I was still human and still sane. I hadn't been struck down in a fit of godly fury. Maybe I can do this after all. I looked around and tried to get myself back on track. I knew vaguely the direction I needed to go, and I didn't want to lose any more time. I thought my walk would remain a lonely one, but that wasn't the case. The ravens would flock around me from time to time. I never felt the weight of invisible eyes again, but the ravens were definitely watching me. When I strayed too close to one of the black trees, a white raven dove down and tugged me away from it. Just in time too. The tree had leaned forward and bristled with blackthorns. It struggled towards me, trying to grab me. What the heck? I recalled from the unnatural display. Bad. Tree. Away. The ravens hovering near me repeated the phrase twice more. Despite my curiosity, I didn't ask for clarification. I doubted that they'd be able to explain much. I'll be more careful. They seemed satisfied with that. I made sure to keep my distance from the black trees moving forward. In a way, the presence of the ravens was comforting. Animals rejected unnatural things, so they could warn me if a devil approached. The younger ones were cute too. It was difficult to be somber when little birds were hopping around me trying to play. I noticed the lingering shadow overhead while I walked and teased one of the little ravens on my shoulder. An older raven, black with graying feathers, circled around me a few times. I noticed it was holding something in its mouth. I stopped walking. The little ravens on my shoulder shot away from me. That's suspicious. The new bird immediately landed in front of me. It moved its beak around to show me the small blue bead it carried. Then it hopped towards me, gesturing with its beak for me to hold my hand out. I looked up and saw that this was the only raven nearby at the moment. I hesitated before making a decision. I reached down to take the bead. It was cold to kneel down in the snow. The raven didn't startle when I almost fell. It waited patiently for me to hold out my hand. The small bead rolled out of its beak and onto my gloved palm. My hand spasmed as the warmth from the bead sank into it. I clutched it in my hands and stood up. For the first time since I've been dragged out of the apothecary, I felt warmth. Whoa, thank you, little, I stared at the old raven, unsure how to address it. Girl.
The hair on the back of my neck rose as a low voice drifted in on the wind. What? I looked around in terror. She's a girl. I jumped again and opened my palms. The blue bead in my hand glowed faintly with white light. It dimmed quickly back to a rich blue. The raven was staring at me expectantly. Thank you, little girl. She let out a pleased caw before flying away. I stared at the bead in my hand. Hello? There was no reply. With my new item in hand, I continued my walk. Occasionally, the bead would flare with life and give me short instructions. Left. Turn around. Right. I felt slightly on edge, taking advice from an unseen presence. The only comfort I had was the slight familiarity of the man's accent. It sounded like mine, but antiquated, like he'd walk out of the past into the present. The voice was low and surprisingly soft despite being very frank in tone. Each time it spoke, my suspicion grew. Anytime my course wavered, there was a correction swiftly given to me. It was a little too perfect for my tastes. Beyond that, the voice did not speak at all. Even when I tried to catch its attention, it remained silent. I wondered what it was, who it was. In the past, they said crazy old mages lived on Mount Gelus. Could it be one of them? For now, I trusted the corrections because I had no other choice. Navigation was practically impossible for me without the stars or a compass. I could only hope I wasn't being tricked. The voice interrupted my thoughts. Hide in the nearest great tree. Great tree? I blinked and looked around. One of the great trees was slowly opening up, revealing a small pocket of darkness. I stared at it skeptically. The black trees were obviously evil. I hadn't seen the gray ones move yet. The way it opened looked very similar to a mouth. Hurry! This felt too much like a trap. I hesitated. Hello? The gentle, shaking voice of a young woman echoed on the breeze. Someone there! Can you help me? Another person. I was dumbfounded. Another person? Here? Do not respond. Get in the tree! I looked down at the bead skeptically again. No ravens were inside. The raven that gave this to me could have been a devil in disguise. No devil could pretend to be human, though. The divine law of the natural prevented that. Please, I need help. That new voice sounded closer now. Listen to me. The male voice actually showed signs of frustration now. I weighed my options before making a decision. I will listen to the voice in the beat. I'm pretty sure that's a demon out there. Thus far, this voice has been my only ally. It would be stupid to ignore it now. I moved to the tree as fast as my feeble legs could go. Darkness surrounded me quickly. The seam in the tree mended itself. Once the last bit of sunlight faded, small dots of light began to pop into existence. I watched in fascination as they swirled around me lazily. I reached out to touch one with my fingertip. It buzzed against my finger, warm and alive. My awe at the odd sight was trampled by the sounds of unnaturally heavy footsteps. Keep your voice low. The voice in the beat was whispering now, so low I could barely hear him. Is that person in danger too? That is not a human. I looked down at the bead. Devils can pretend to be human here. A bolt of dread shot down my back. Of course, things would be different on this cursed mountain. That thing is a devil, and it wants to eat you. I shuddered in disgust. Hello? Please, is anyone there? The voice was louder now. Help me! Help me! I shuddered in horror as the voice changed. Before, it sounded kind of young, but not too young. Now it sounded like a frantic child on the verge of tears. Stay calm. The voice in the beat tried to sound soothing. I imagined he didn't want me to freak out and draw attention to this tree. You won't get hurt. I won't let that happen. I gulped and clutched the beat tightly. The voice continued to persist around the tree. It circled around many times. I flinched when something slammed into the tree. Help me! Help me! Please, help me! I'm so hungry! I need help! Don't leave me! Something slammed into another tree nearby. How vexing. The voice growled. The lights in the tree slowly began to gather together into the form of a person. Its intense gaze rendered me speechless. The figure of light looked me up and down. Your condition is deteriorating too fast. You won't make it to Mord's Pass. He was matter of fact. I let out a small noise of fear. Phantom fingers pressed against my lips. Shh. I'll take care of you. I looked up at the face above me in surprise. You are my guest. It is required of me to do so. You are sick. It is my duty to tend to the sick. The figure pulled its hand away from my face. I can understand if you are skeptical of me. But I am being honest. When this tree releases you, follow the ravens. Hopefully that cooperation with me will help you feel less anxious. It would. Devils could not make copies of themselves. Devils would not work together. Thus a flock of ravens will be a good indicator that the voice isn't a devil. Beyond the fact that it just saved my life. Do you understand? The figure looked down at me, waiting for my answer, and nodded my head. The pieces had begun to finally click together. A male voice had lived on this mountain, a voice that had a duty to the sick and a responsibility to his guests. This was Heimos himself. I felt slightly daft for not realizing it sooner. Good. Hold on a bit longer. The figure fell apart into a tiny ball of light once more. The presence left, and I was alone again. The devil haunting me took a small eternity to finally drift away. Once a good 20-minute passed with no sounds of its voice, the trees opened up once more. A sigh in relief had seen the flock of ravens waiting on me. It really was Heimos himself. They greeted me happily before taking flight and leading the way. My journey shifted course then. Heimos had accepted my greeting, apparently. Heimos had been paying attention to me since, and he'd been taking his time to try and guide me to the pass. Why? I really couldn't figure it out. I wasn't going to be ungrateful for it, though. Of course, the devil had to get in the way and ruin things. If only I had remained undetected, I might have been walking down a mountain towards Riverfellow in just a few more hours. Now I was clutching a glass bead like it was my lifeline and walking deeper into Mount Gelus. No one had been this far outside of fables and legends. I was making history with each step. I felt excited. I had caught the attention of a god. Sure, he wasn't a god, but his power was obvious enough. He seemed to be willing to help me too. I might get cured even closer to home than Riverfellow, though I didn't know what the price of my cure would be yet. I had to make it to him first. I kept a close eye on the ravens to not lose my way. The ravens circled close to me. One or two even landed on my shoulder periodically to brush the snow off my hat. I was grateful that they were back at all. The walk to where Heimos was took a lot out of me. On more than one occasion, I fell and I struggled to get up. The snow would shift under me and gingerly set me upright. I would feel the wind carefully wrap around me to ensure I didn't immediately fall again. Once my balance returned, the support would fade to let me walk on my own. A few more times, Heimos ordered me to hide. Each time, I would be tucked into the safety of a great tree. Each time, I held my breath and tried to ignore the human-sounding voices calling out to me. How can they defy the law of the divine? I was mostly mumbling to myself in an attempt to drown out the female wailing I could hear outside. Do you really want to know? Heimos' voice sounded calm and collected. It still made me jump a bit. Yeah, I do. Mount Gelus is the doorway to the hells. Devils pour out onto it when they can. This area is not ruled by divine law, but once they cross the barrier into the world outside, divine law returns. Heimos let out a pleased noise when I finished his thought. Gods, no wonder the stories talk of shape-changers on this mountain. Uh-huh. The beat went quiet once more. Once the wailing devils had passed, I was released to continue my walk. My journey took a long time. As night fell across Mount Gelus, the temperature plummeted. My legs grew too stiff to move and I ended up stuck in place. No matter how warm the beat made me feel, it couldn't melt the frost beginning to grow on my clothes. Exhaustion, dehydration, and hunger also made me weaker. I can't walk any further. It felt bad to admit out loud, but it was the truth. The beat remained dark for some time. Then it glowed. I felt Heimos' presence once more. The snow beneath me began to shift. I watched in fascination as a horse of stone rose under me. I squeaked in surprise and would have fallen off it if it weren't for the roots holding my legs in place. The earth elemental let out a grinding noise that mimicked the neigh of a horse. Amazing. I ran my hand along its neck, marveling at the way it vibrated. If it weren't for the fact it was made of stone, I might have thought it was a real horse in the dark. Once I was situated, I began to trot casually through the snow. With a small pop and surge of energy, flames began to pop into existence around me. They hovered nearby, slowly warming me up. I let out a sigh of relief. The horse stone moved much faster than I had. Being an entity of pure elemental power, it didn't need to rest either. It was slightly comical how much ground the beast could cover compared to my awkward shuffling. I wonder why Heimos didn't just start with this. At least I didn't have to navigate in the dark. I had no lantern, no torch. Stumbling around here would probably send me face first into one of the black trees. The terrain grew harsher and harsher the further up the mountain we journeyed. I could feel my body angling awkwardly with the shift. I doubted I would have been able to make this climb on my own. I patted the horse's neck in thanks. After a ride long enough to make my legs ache, the ground began to flatten in a gentle incline. The mouth of a cave rested on the mountainside. Soft runes glowed faintly with power. Despite the constant snow, the stone floor within were exposed. The horse beneath me began to crumble. Gently, I was led off its back and onto my feet once more. I could hear the sounds of the ravens nearby, one landed on my shoulder. Awkwardly, I shifted in the darkness. I wondered if I should call out to him. Moment. I looked at the raven in confusion. That made no sense. All the other ravens added to it, meaning I wasn't sure what to do. In the end, I had only two options. I waited for Heimos. It seemed too rude to demand his immediate attention. The living god probably had other things to do besides babysitting some random human. I tucked my arms under my armpits and waited. Soon, small bits of light began to light up in the dark. I heard the sound of bare feet walking on stone. Finally, a pale foot appeared in the moonlight. I know you're a god, but holy heck, why are you so cute? Beautiful silver-white curls poured over her thin shoulders. Bits of ice froze some of the ends, and the glint of golden beads poked out here and there. Two braids lined with gold thread framed the sharp face. A crown of ice only made him seem even taller. Unnatural blue eyes stared at me, unblinking. His white lashes were covered in frost, and parts of his skin were blue with the cold. He didn't seem bothered by it in the slightest. Light violet lips pulled into a thin line while he examined me. He had to slouch slightly to avoid hitting his head on the roof of the cave. The people of Mor the Whale were said to be descendants of giants, and seeing how he towered over me, it might just be true. As he observed me, he untucked his hands from his sleeves. One was normal, albeit covered in frost and tinted light blue. He chewed his nails. It was a very human quirk. The other hand didn't even look human. It appeared to be made of ice and warped black branches. It was still hand-shaped, but its fingers ended in sharp claws. The inhuman hand was quickly tucked out of sight behind him. Thank you for your patience. Heimos gave me a slight bow. Something had come up that required immediate total attention. It's okay, it happens. Still, I apologize. It's a rude thing to do to guests. Heimos straightened and looked me up and down. Come inside. You're very weak. Heimos gestured for me to join him. I eagerly walked up to him. If he was startled by my behavior, he didn't show it. We entered the dark hallway of the cave. Heimos kept pace with me despite his long legs. His human hand hovered awkwardly in the air along my upper back. I could tell he planned on grabbing me if I fell. It was comforting to know I wouldn't slam face first onto the stone floor. I wonder what kind of place a living god would dwell in. Would it be a vast temple carved from stone? Maybe it would be some mystical gathering of arcane energy. It might very well be a frozen-over wasteland, void of human comforts. As the light at the end of the tunnel grew brighter, my questions were answered. The main antechamber we entered was cozy. Simple furniture rested in front of the blaring hearth. The room was round, and the walls were obviously carved cave walls. A few tapestries hung here and there, and a few documents were also stuck to the walls. Books were scattered about on the floors too. A mixture of dark hallways and closed doors dotted the walls. To my surprise, it was warm in here. I stared at the surprisingly mundane and human-like abode, expecting something different. A bit. I tried my best to not sound as surprised as I felt. I prefer mortal comforts like anyone else. Heimos gestured to the cushioned bench. Take off your outer layers and settle there after leaving your clothes near the fire. You're soaked through in some places. Heimos eyed me up and down. Nothing I have will fit you easily, but I can modify something. Wait, Heimos can sew? That's neat. Of course nothing would fit me easily. He was a Martewalo and easily 7 feet tall. Are you able to move your hands enough to deal with buttons? I think so. Just being near the fire was making my hands feel alive again. Very well. Let me know if you have any trouble. Heimos drifted into one of the doors and left me to my own devices. I managed to get my fingers warm enough to start taking off my outer layers. While they had been a blessing outside, they were practically suffocating now. My shuddering slowly began to calm down and pass. Nausea and a headache remained. The mark on my back pulled and ached. I pressed my fingers to my wrists, reveling in my pulse, hot and nervous. Heimos still wasn't back from the room he entered. Perhaps I could use this time to look around. I guess I'll look around. I moved around the main room, examining the scattered books and papers. Most of them appeared to be medical documents of some kind. The documents were in a surprising variety of languages. Some were diagrams of people and plants, others appeared to be essays of some kind. The books I found were similarly all focused on medicine. Everything was covered in tight notes and minor corrections. Well, I assumed the words were heavily crossed out with angry-looking text near them were corrections. Once I grew bored of examining the papers, I began to poke around the other hallways. Most were pitch black with only a few clusters of light gathering near the floor. I didn't have any way to light my way, so decided not to venture too deep into them. Eventually, I strayed towards the door opposite the one Heimos looked into. It opened to reveal a library. The circular room wrapped around a pillar of ice that rested on a blanket of odd-looking flowers and grass. When I approached the grass, I could feel the energy radiating from it. If the main room felt cozy, this place felt magical. The arcane energy in the air made my teeth buzz. I walked around the library and noticed a pedestal behind the pillar of ice. A giant tome rested on top of it. The tome was bursting at the seams and only held together with leather thread. Papers had been shoved into it as well. The stains and wear on it showed constant use. I approached it to take a look. My hands reached out to touch it. Please refrain from touching that. Heimos' voice caught me off guard, and my hand froze right over the tome. Heimos stood with an exasperated expression on his face. Sorry. I pulled back from the book and gave him a sheepish smile. You've been going through my things. I cringed a bit at that. Boredom? He looked unimpressed. I left you alone for 10 minutes. He sighed. Next time, just call out to me. The items in my home could be dangerous, so you shouldn't touch things. Really? Yeah. Is this book dangerous? I looked back at it. Is it alive or something? It was fat enough to be. No, it is important to me though, and I am dangerous to those who try to take it. Well, that is charming. The implied threat ruined any attempt at me repairing the mood with humor. Please do not touch it. He was back to neutral professionalism in a flash. Come on, we have other things to discuss beyond an old tome. He gestured for me to follow him back to the main room. I did so. Heimos had laid out a simple, mortar whale-style fur robe out for me. It had been cut in places to make it fit my frame better, but it ruined the beautiful embroidery on the top layer. This should fit. You can wear it while your clothes are tended to. Thank you. Wow. I held the small piece of history in my hands and stared at it. It's just a common robe. He looked at my outfit. Though fashion seems to have changed in Mortarwhale. How do you not cause aura fry with no thinner layers between the thicker ones? Aura fry? Heimos looked at me like I had asked a stupid question. Aura fry is when your runes cross and entangle. It can burn layers. He held up his sleeve and revealed many layers. I saw that some layers did in fact have runes on them. Actually, he picked up my coat. Where are your runes? No wonder you look miserable in the cold. Rune embroidery died with Mortarwhale, if I remember correctly. The light in the room dimmed. Heimos straightened to his full height. A single blue eye looked down at me from over his shoulder. What? We don't know how to do rune embroidery. Heimos turned. Not that part. About Mortarwhale. They died? I didn't think it would be possible for him to get any paler. He took a step back, balanced unsteady for a moment. Then he sat down on the bench in front of the fire and took a slow breath. Were you actually a Mortarwhale? Scholars theorized he was, due to where his prison was. Technically, though, he could have been from anywhere on the continent. I am a Mortarwhale. His correction came out in a tight voice. The last one, apparently. His face remained impassive, but I could see his mind racing. I'm sorry. I thought you knew. I didn't. Heimos paused and took a moment to collect himself. Irrelevant. I'm getting sidetracked when you're dying. He shook his head and looked at me. Show me the curse mark. I need to see what can be done about it. That makes sense. I stood up from the bench and turned around. My shirt slid up my back easily to reveal the mark in question. This is going to be an uncomfortable suggestion, so I apologize. Please step back towards me. I can't quite see the mark from here. I realized what he meant when I took a step back. It was a little awkward standing in front of him, exposing my lower back while he was sitting down. It felt oddly intimate in an uncomfortable way. I see what you mean. My apologies. I will work quickly. I nodded. Heimos examined the mark while making a few notes. Alright, I'm done. He nudged me to take a step away from him. I did so and let my shirt fall back down. I turned to face him. He used his quill to gesture to the door he went into earlier. Technically, that is my bedroom. I do not, however, have a guest room, so for now, it will be yours. You can go change in there. Where will you sleep then? My library, or here? He shrugged. I rarely sleep to begin with. Don't you need to sleep? No. While I'm usually happy to answer questions, I need time to think. I was tempted to ask him if my situation was that serious. The intense look on his face while he wrote stopped me. I went to the room to change. It was a simple room with simple furniture. Like everywhere else, papers and books were scattered around. A small hearth burned in one corner of the room to keep it warm. I enjoyed the warmth while changing into my borrowed clothes. It hung awkwardly in place, but was dry, light, and cozy. My fingers strayed across the embroidered underlayers curiously. No one in the Empire knew how to make runes out of thread. If we could, it would make survival easier in Andatal. It makes me wonder how many miracles were stored in this place. Heimos had hundreds of years to gather powerful items and knowledge. He was practically hoarding it. Some parts of me wonder if he had the right to do that. What was the point in gathering all this information for himself? It could do so much good in the right hands. I could do so much good if I got my hands on some of it. I dismissed the thought. I was making too many assumptions. For one, I didn't know if he never sent out any information. Some stories did tell of ravens carrying cures after all. Beyond that, who knew just how dangerous some of this stuff could be? Just because it might do some good in some hands, doesn't mean everyone could use it for good. Besides that, I didn't like where that line of thought was going. Trying to steal from Heimos resulted in tragedy every time. I wasn't eager to join the fables as another example of human arrogance. Human? Heimos' voice interrupted my thinking. I had partially closed the door, but he could have easily just opened it. Instead, he waited. I'm decent. Heimos entered then. He looked me up and down. What? It looks good on you. Don't sound too surprised now. I just didn't expect it. He shrugged. Did I make a god blush? Did I? Of course it looked good on me. I'm wearing it. Heimos surprised me with a chuckle. Hey, whatever keeps your confidence high. Rude. Irrelevant. Your condition. We need to discuss it. I'd hate to say it, but you're in a bad spot. I knew that already. Take whatever your idea of bad is and worsen it tenfold. I frowned and sat down on the edge of the bed. That bad? Yes, that bad. The good news is that it is not of divine retribution, so I can help you. I sighed in relief. The bad news is that the window for the easiest solution has passed. Easiest solution? Yes, there was a solution as simple as pulling it out. Why can't you just do that now? It will kill you. What can we do then? A standard cure. A blessing? A panacea. Though I can see how priests might call them blessings. Panaceas are made by slowly condensing pure energy from the person in question. This process takes time, but it is fully capable of purging the curse mark. It will not kill the recipient or leave them permanently maimed afterwards. Maimed. The process can leave a hole in your soul, causing permanent disability or injury as a result. The panacea heals this hole that cannot heal itself, avoiding that problem. I see. Do you have a panacea? That is a small problem. I can make a panacea. It will just take more time. How much time? I don't have much left with the mark complete. Up to a month. I gaped at him. I'll be dead before then. No, you won't. I can keep you alive during the process. I can also give you medicine to make being alive during it not so miserable. You can survive this. I sat on the offer for a few moments. It's your only option. You won't survive the trek to wherever you're going. I can't stay here for a whole month? Well, your body tries to kill you, yes. I know that. It's just amazing. Okay, I'll stay here. Good. Welcome. He waited for me to supply my name. Lionel. Welcome, Lionel. A lot of people just call me Ho. People just call me a damn hoe. Like, don't you worry about that. We'll stick with Lionel for now. Please, feel free to make yourself comfortable in the bed. I will bring some food for you to eat before you rest. But first, come here. Heimos held out his inhuman hand. I stared at it for a second before stepping towards it. The cool tip of one of his claws pressed against my forehead. I could feel a cold sensation wrap around my head twice. With a faint burn, something was engraved onto my forehead. To make sure you don't die. Heimos pulled his hand back. I reached up to touch it, but I couldn't feel any kind of mark. All that lingered was a mild chill that had settled into my skull. I've got a rough idea of your condition. I will add medication to your food as well. That way, when the symptoms begin to worsen, it won't be as bad. If you take the medicine, refuse it, and you will suffer. Understand? I do. Good. Heimos turned and left the room then. My time at the Sacrarium had begun. Whoa. Week 1? Heimos proved to be true to his words. He brought me a mixture of food and medicine before I drifted off. When I woke up later, I was still in his room, still alive. The cursed mark continued to ache, but my other symptoms were calmer. I felt well enough to even eat the collection of fruits and vegetables left for me. My hand straight up to my forehead. It no longer burned, but I could feel the faint presence of something sticking there. Not physically, more like I felt it in my soul. It felt slightly chilly as a result. What did he do to me? My curiosity gave me the strength to get out of bed. Heimos was nowhere to be seen in the main antechamber. The door to the library hung slightly open. Heimos didn't seem pleased the last time I went in there. I hesitated at the entryway, wondering if I should knock. He also used this place as a makeshift bedroom due to my being here. Awkwardly, I knocked on the door. Enter. Heimos was in the back of the room, hunched over a desk and examining something under a magnifying glass. He didn't look up at me at all as I approached. One moment. I decided to let my eyes wander a bit. The giant pillar of ice in the library felt so out of place. It should have been making this place freezing cold, but the air remained cozy. I watched as streaks of energy moved through the ice, chasing streaks of black smoke. There. Heimos put some tools down and turned to look at me. I had pulled my eyes away to meet his gaze. What did you need? What did you do to me? In what sense? I pointed to my forehead. A spell. I gathered that much. What part of it are you curious about? What's going on with my body? You are suspended in time currently to halt the disease. Wait, so I'm not aging? Physically, no. Mentally, yes. You're still aware of time passing. If I didn't do this, the disease would rapidly spread and cause havoc. But it's just a disease, right? Exactly. Please do not go jumping off of cliffs or beheading yourself. You're frozen in time, not invulnerable. There's a difference? A big one. I see. So does this take a lot of energy to maintain? Yes, it does. Mortal beings would rapidly wither if they tried it. But it's nothing to you. Not nothing. It's not a lot either. You were still frozen while still experiencing symptoms. Which means if you don't take your medicine, the symptoms will flare up. I nodded in understanding. That's all there is to it. So that's why he was so confident I would be fine. I see. It is my duty to heal the sick. If that is all, Heimos moved to turn back to his work. I have another question. Heimos turned back to me almost immediately. Yes? Do you know how I got cursed? Off the top of my head? No. Could we figure it out? Yes, there are only so many ways for it to occur. First of all, it isn't divine retribution. How do you know that? The shape is wrong. Divine retribution always bears the shape of the god or goddess who gave it to you. Simple circles belong to devils. I see. What's after that? Deals with devils. You don't seem to be the type, though. I'm not. Not that. Did you buy anything new recently? It could be something very plain. A new brush or a new pair of boots. No, I haven't needed to. Not a cursed object, then. All that's left is a grudge. A grudge. Some human souls can taint the living in a way similar to devils after death. This tainting process makes curse marks. Has anyone important to you died recently? Family? Lover? I thought about it. Death wasn't an uncommon thing in Andatal in general. Someone close to me, though? No, not that I know of. I amended the statement when my heart twisted at the thought of Edith. That you know of. It wouldn't be related to this. When I was cast out, an older friend of mine tried to defend me. The priest ordered an exorcism. Ah, the barbaric rituals of the Southern Church. They must recognize the problem immediately. She's older? Yeah. Would you like me to check on her? I was floored by the offer. You can't leave the mountain. Technically, that's complicated. For a more simple solution. Heimos gestured up to the rafters where a variety of ravens rested. They can, and I can borrow their eyes. Could you? Heimos nodded. His eyes glowed faintly and some of the birds flew away. Let me focus. Okay. We stood in silence for a while. Heimos' glowing eyes flicked back and forth while watching things I couldn't see. Describe her to me. I did so, hoping I was doing a good job. Heimos let out a pleased noise. She's alive. My shoulders sagged in relief. Heimos winced. She's very loud. She always is. The power in his eyes faded, and he looked at me once more. Thank you, Heimos. It's not a problem, and required minimal effort. Even though he said that, I saw him rub his temple. His eyes were slightly bloodshot now. He continued on before I could ask about it. She's obviously not the culprit. I crossed my arms and tried to think. The mark seems to have developed for about 3 weeks, if that helps. Immediately, one death sprung to mind. Eric? The Mason's son? Why you look at me like I can say yes or no? Right, you wouldn't know him. Did he die around that time? He did. He died in a bar fight about 3 weeks ago. He took a bad blow to the head and his brain bled out on the inside. Was he a friend? No, just a neighbor. He had a less than pleasant personality. I tried to be polite and avoid him mostly. Avoid him? Does that mean he tried to talk to you? I nodded. He never crossed that line, so I didn't think too much about it. We did get into an argument the day he died, though. He certainly seems like a culprit. Huh. If he had a one-sided attraction to you, it could explain the curse being a plague. How? Also, how do I have a yandere in this game? Jesus Christ. Obsessive jealousy to make sure no one else would want you after his death. I let out a disgusted noise. It's quite common for lust-based curse marks to be plagues due to that sentiment. That's vile. It is. I shuddered and felt my skin crawl. I'm not even interested in relationships. I'm not even attracted to men. I wasn't attracted to him at all. I'm attracted to you, fam. I thought I made it clear too. Some men are too stupid to take the hint, even if you hit him with it. Speaking from experience, of course. I'm not ugly. That's the only limitation for a man of my status back home. He surprisingly didn't sound smug, just matter of fact. I chewed on the revelation. All it takes is one butthole to ruin your life. And he doesn't even have to be alive to do it. How does that even happen? Do you really want to know? Kind of. A little. The short version? I don't know how much I understand of the long version. Understandable. Heimos thought about his answer before continuing. Human souls linger for a time after death. During this time, they contain the souls of still living humans. It's a natural problem. Yes and no. That's vague. That's the short version. Heimos shrugged a shoulder at me. The sound of bird wings flapping interrupted our conversation. Heimos watched as the raven landed, depositing a small scroll case on his desk. He scowled darkly at it. Bad news? No, an annoying sender. Did you just get spam mail? I hate to say it, but I do need to deal with that. Is it urgent? More so in the sense that the sender is impatient and prone to dangerous pranks. Heimos gestured for me to follow him. He walked me to the door of the library. Please, stay out of the library until I exit it again. I don't know what's in that case, and I'd rather you not find out. Is the sender that bad? Worse. Heimos sighed. Apologies for our conversation being interrupted. We can continue later if you wish. Alright. Thank you, Heimos. He gave me a polite partial bow of acknowledgement before shutting the library door. I felt better having some answers about what's going on. There was no way I could tell Derek what his son had done to me from the grave. It would obviously shatter him, and he was already broken after losing Eric. I felt horrible knowing that Eric was even worse than Derek knew. He already knew his son was unpopular, but this was on a whole different level. I had to make sure no one found out about this, for Derek's sake at least. I sat down on the third bench inside. There were many things I needed to think about regarding home. At least now I would have the time to do it. Sacrarium had more space inside than I imagined. A network of dark hallways crawled through the mountain. I was free to go to many places, but there were a few places that Heimos forbade me from entering. I didn't mind the limitation. There was a small garden to enjoy, full of fruits and vegetables. The bathing room mercifully had hot water. One thing I noticed quickly was that there wasn't much to do. Heimos had himself buried behind a wall of books at any point in time. For me, there was no immediate equivalent. I had to find things to do. I just couldn't spend the next few weeks bored out of my mind. Eventually, Heimos noticed my restlessness. Is something wrong? He sounded concerned. Nah, nothing's wrong. Just restless. There isn't much to do here, is there? Heimos scratched at his cheek with a single claw. I don't often entertain guests. I assumed. I mean, the legends speak for themselves. Heimos nodded. What did you do back home? Mostly, I worked. I was the baker in town. It is odd to not be working for a change. Would baking make you feel more comfortable? It'd be something to do. There's an oven here. I could feel my eyes light up. There is? Come with me. Heimos led me to the tapestry that hid the kitchen from the main antechamber. The kitchen was a tight, crowded space for Heimos alone. With the two of us in here, we were practically touching. Heimos pushed aside some beads dangling and revealed another tiny room. It had an oven tucked into a wall. I don't use it often, but you can feel free to. Really? Sure. It's not like you'd burn this place down after all. Thank you, Heimos. It's not a problem. Perhaps we can include whatever you make as part of our meals. Heimos paused. On that note, would you prefer to eat together? I'm a busy individual, but I do still eat. Perhaps talking over meals would help pass the time. He sounded awkward while offering, like he never had to think about this before. It didn't sound like he hated the idea, though. I would love to, actually. That would be nice. It would definitely help pass the time. Very well, then. Heimos nodded in an obvious attempt to not look flustered. He's blushing! I made a god blush! God damn it! I'm not the best at remembering to eat. You might need to remind me when I need to cook. I can do that. Good. Heimos took the time to show me where the few important things were in the kitchen. He then disappeared to continue his work. Even with my new forms of entertainment, I thought strayed me to home often. The first few times, I got teary. After that, my mood just became heavy. It was depressing to realize how little they made me feel. I was also worried for those who stood up for me. I could only hope that old Clarendon stopped at just the exorcisms. I shook my head and got up from where I was sketching to pass the time. My body needed to move, so I stepped out of the bedroom. To my surprise, Heimos wasn't in his library. He sat on the ground in front of the fire, watching it with heavy-lidded eyes. His hands were idly knitting something. A few of the ravens had gathered on his lap. Blue eyes lazily trailed over to me when the door shut behind me. What? You knit? You don't? It didn't sound accusatory, merely curious. No, not really. Edith knits most of the things. Interesting. Knitting and sewing were required skills for everyone in Mordervale. He turned his attention back to his work. I wasn't sure if I necessarily wanted to talk about knitting. I was sure that I didn't want to talk about home, and Heimos seemed open to talking. I walked over and sat down on the bench, keeping some space between us. Heimos didn't react to my presence. Why was it required? We all had to learn a lot of basic skills in case we got separated from the caravan. Did Mord really travel by constant caravan? Many scholars argued over that. Some thought it was nearly impossible for people to constantly keep on the move in a near tundra. Others thought that claiming otherwise contradicted all evidence. It was necessary. We had to follow our food, in more ways than one. Oh? Earth elementals would make pockets of unfrozen land. We would gather around these pockets for a season or two to grow crops. Then it would be used up, and we need to find the next one. It was a hard life, but it was ours. Heimos sighed. I even made sure to reduce the freeze to make gardens more common. Excuse me? I blinked at him. What? You can't casually mention affecting the weather in an entire region like that. It's simple enough to do if you have the power. The human in me wanted to hit him for making it sound so simple. I decided to focus on clarifying things to avoid smacking the back of his head. Kirwai Endatel can farm now. The Emperor saw the change in weather as proof of the divine favoring his ascension. Well, that is a disgusting thought. It was certainly not the gods who did it. It was me. I wanted to make their lives easier. Vile cretin brat. His knitting needle moved faster with his annoyance. Are you referring to the first Emperor as a brat? He was a young upstart, a folk legend, and a hero to those in the Empire. A sniveling, arrogant brat, yes. I had the displeasure of meeting him once. Should have killed him. Heimos sighed. Things are always clearer in hindsight. They are. I'm glad that you didn't kill the first Emperor, though. I mean, wouldn't I even exist if you had? Fair point. I was surprised he conceded that. What Emperor is your empire on now? The 10th, mostly because the 4th and 8th Emperors died young. It's always strange to hear about the passage of time. It must feel like an eternity. It doesn't, which is why it feels weird. Doesn't? I already felt like a small century had passed despite it only being a few days. I'm not aware of time passing unless a human is in proximity. due to the fact that time herself ignores me. Could you expand on that a bit more? He had a bad habit of skipping over relevant information. The goddess of time removed me from her awareness. Awareness is what causes humans to be aware of time passing. Her awareness is why you know how many minutes have passed and how soon it is until your next task. She doesn't cause us to age physically. That is her husband's death. His awareness causes the human body to decay. Together, they cause age and injury. Perfect immortality is when both of them are unaware of you. Like you. Heimos nodded. Like me. For me, only 2 years have passed due to the number of guests I've had. During your stay here, I will be aware of the month passing by. When you leave, I'll be none the wiser once more. You spoke about it so casually, so calmly that I almost didn't process the extra layer of tragedy. To Heimos, he had only been away from his people for 2 years. That's horrible. I'm sorry. Heimos gave me a faint, sad smile. It's a mercy in a way. The mortal mind cannot withstand eternity. We break eventually. Not being aware of time is why I'm still sane. That only helps so much though. I mean, damn. If I found out my people were dead only after 2 years passing, I shook my head. How are you so calm? Our profession requires perfect emotional control at all times. I feel the pain deeply, but there is always work to be done. That's a sad way to live. It is. Heimos shrugged. A heavy pause lingered in the air. I doubt you can come out to talk about my woes. What brought you out here? I fought the urge to sigh as he deflected the focus back to me. Home. Home? I can't stop thinking about it. It's a common train of thought. It's depressing to think about. Heimos' hand stopped moving. I had his full attention. I'm sorry. Allow a surprised chuckle at that. What are you apologizing for? It's not like you left me in the snow. A fable saved me when my own people didn't. It was a laughable display, really. That doesn't mean I can't be sympathetic. I doubt you expected this to happen. I didn't. Never thought about cursed marks. They just seem to not be a problem I need to worry about. Every other time I've been sick, they've been there. Anytime I needed them, they had my back. But this time, when I arguably need them the most, I couldn't even finish the thought as ice-cold misery sank into me. Heimos shifted from where he was sitting. He reached out his human hand and patted my knee. It's alright to be upset about it. It's a devastating thing, betrayal. That's what it is, isn't it? I felt my eyes burn. Yes. Damn it. I rubbed at them. It's alright to cry. Well, that did it. Heimos waited patiently for me to finish babbling and sniffling. He didn't seem judgmental at all. His normally stoic expression softened with pity. I wrangled my emotions in at some point. Once my sniffles faded, Heimos handed me a handkerchief. Better? Not really. Heimos gave me a sad smile. Yeah, does take a bit longer, doesn't it? Take the time you need. I nodded. After that, Heimos and I chatted idly for a bit longer. Anyway, I think I'm going to be ending the playthrough right here. We will be back with part 2 of this if you guys want it. So, hey, let me know in the comments below if you want it. And of course, if you guys want to play this game for yourself, link to the game will be in the description below. And all that good stuff as well. Anyway, I hope you all have a lovely rest of the day. Of course, I will be seeing you in the next video. This is Lionel, signing off. Ciao.